All right. Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone all around the world, and welcome to our second week of webinars for ransomware with Charles Sturt University and IT Masters, presented by the wonderful and knowledgeable Jeremy Costa, one of our fantastic subject mentors and a bona fide expert in cybersecurity. My name is Jack Stewart. I'm a course consultant at IT Masters. We are also joined by Kit French, who is going to be dealing with the back end, the logistics, helping out with subject-based queries, or rather logistical or course-related queries, rather than the actual subject queries themselves. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we get officially started. As usual, in the chat, feel free to communicate with the panelists as well as your fellow participants. It's a great place to get insight from other people in the webinar, participants in the webinar who often have a very wide variety of experience and knowledge. If you have questions for Jeremy regarding the topics that are being discussed in the webinar itself, so the actual course content, please direct that to the Q&A section. And keep that Q&A section, if possible, free from questions about the course, about recordings, exams, etc. Those questions can be popped in the chat. Kit and I will do our best to answer them. And for other course-related queries, please head to learn.itmasters.edu.au for all of the webinar recordings, course materials, podcasts, links, etc., as well as the forums, which hopefully everybody has been participating in or will be participating in very shortly. We are going to get started in just a minute with Jeremy's content. And before we do, I'd just like to acknowledge that we are presenting today from the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation and the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay respects to their elders and ancestors, acknowledge their ongoing connections to land, waters, and culture, and their unceded sovereignty. So, welcome to the second week of the ransomware webinar series, short course presented by IT Masters and Charles Sturt University. Topic number 2 is lateral movement, accounts and vulnerabilities. And Jeremy Costa is your illustrious host. Here's Jeremy.
Thanks, Jack. It's great to see everyone coming into the webinar, and the numbers go up. Last week we covered in topic 1, we covered the initial intrusion vectors, the way that an organization might be penetrated, and that way in which ransomware gets a spot on the network or in an account or in a computer that allows them to move on. This week we'll be covering the lateral movement from that beachhead, from that location that they managed to gain, and then how that might work for them in getting to the next layer, to across the network. Now we'll talk just about neighboring computers this time. There's so much in this that it's worthwhile dedicating this webinar to it, but then we'll talk about protection measures. Next week we'll be talking about Active Directory and the actual challenges of keeping that secure, and how there are so many ways to configure Active Directory insecurely, and it seems that the ransomware criminals and the ransomware operators tend to have a race for domain admin, because once they've got domain admin, they own the authentication layer, they can get anywhere. And then we'll be talking about identification and then recovery. And it'll all be about how we identify this happening in our environment, because that's the key, right? So if they get into your environment, that's one thing, but if you can identify them moving about, then you can stop them there before they actually do damage. So it's all about that prevention rather than cure. And we'll talk about the prevention, and then in the last live session we'll talk about cure, how we actually recover, what we need to do to get the business back to where it needs to be. So talking about this lateral movement, diving into the first slide, the where does ransomware land? So they're out there, they're on the internet, they're in some sort of dark room. You saw the pictures from last week. They're in normal lounge rooms. They've got computers on their laps or on a some sort of rickety table, and they've managed to land in your environment. Where did they land? So we talked about that initial intrusion vector. It might be they land in an Office 365 account. They might land on a VPN endpoint. This means that they've got an account that's allowed them to tunnel into the organization like a normal user would. So many people in corporate environments will have a VPN to access internal systems. That VPN it can also facilitate access for ransomware operators. They might get access to a perimeter system. We talked about web servers that might have vulnerabilities. They can put a web shell on that and then be able to pivot inside. And what are they looking for? Obviously, there's the internet on one side of the website, but then there's the internal network or some DMZ on the other side of the network, and they want to find their way through that. They'll obviously have some sort of permissions. They'll try and scrape as much of the permissions off the location where they landed. So imagine that this guy in the picture here has landed on a computer. The first thing he's going to do is obviously go, hooray, I got somewhere, but then he's going to look down at what he's landed on and see what resources he has there to then move on to somewhere else. Okay, so that's the idea. They've landed somewhere, they're going to get as many resources as possible and then move somewhere else, because they wouldn't have landed on top of the crown jewels straight away. Very rarely does that happen. Maybe if it's a website that's the CRM and you land on that website, you're on the crown jewels already. But usually there's layers, there's a database at the back end or something like that. I have to say an API breach is a little bit like landing on the crown jewels in that way. So that has happened in that case. But this is more about working out what they have at hand to move into the network. When they have landed on something, a computer, it might be a standalone workstation. So it might be, think about someone who's brought their teenager's computer into work so that their son or daughter can do some schoolwork with them or something like that on a no pupil day, right? And they brought that in. They thought, how can I get onto the network? Well, I'll just put in my Wi-Fi credentials so they can get access to the internet. Little do they know that that machine has been used to crack a couple of software games, been infected. It's got, maybe we talked about having something like TrickBot on there. So maybe it's got one of those keyloggers, and you land on a network, and all of a sudden you've become the entry point for the ransomware operator on that network. So maybe they've landed on a standalone workstation, and maybe they've landed on a corporate workstation. And this can happen either in the home or the office. If you think about, our workforces are very mixed mode at the moment. A lot of people going in, a lot of people staying at home, 2 days in office, 3 days at home. Do you have the same sort of security at your home? Do you know all the devices that are on your home? Is there a way for your home network to be open to the internet? Often those residential gateways aren't as secure as we think they are. And then an intrusion can come that way, get some malware on the corporate workstation. And then when they go back into the office, they've brought that back in. Or similarly, when they're working from home, they get infected and then they actually VPN into the network and they've got that VPN endpoint. So that's another way that where this ransomware lands. We get on the network and then they start to move around from there, because once you're on the network, they've got to discover the network. And I think it's funny, sometimes when we have third parties come and review security for an organization, they'll often land on a network and it can take weeks for them to understand what's on the network, and they've got everyone kind of pointing things at them saying, this is where it is, this is where the databases are, this is where the websites are. They provide all that information. But if you think about it, these ransomware operators are getting onto a network and they're doing network discovery pretty quickly. Like a couple of weeks, they figure out how it is. There is some indications that ransomware has even moved through an environment within hours, which is pretty scary. But you'd hope that that was after they'd managed to get privileged credentials. So maybe they had privileged credentials to start with and they could push the ransomware everywhere. So anyway, that's the that's the idea behind this one. Is once they get onto the rock that this guy's standing on, where do they go from there? And a little note at the end of this slide is maybe they haven't used those initial intrusion vectors to get access, and they've tried to compromise accounts. There's people who are very good at that, and they can be an access broker. They can sell the credentials, they can sell the access on a darknet forum, and then the ransomware operator just picks up those credentials and goes and uses them for their own purposes. So that can also be create a delay between the time that you might see that initial intrusion and when they try to move laterally. So it can be different operators. So where to from here? All right, so trying to get from rock to rock, and they are literally trying to get the next asset that they can get a hold of and build their resources within the environment. Resources, I mean the computers that they have the ability to run software on, and the privileges in which they can move around the organization. With an Office 365 account, it's not quite as good as a computer in the environment. It is possible that there is some SharePoint that they could lock up. SharePoint, I think, is probably, from my view, wouldn't be a great target, because there's a lot of, unless you're the admin of SharePoint, there's a lot of kind of layers to the data retention and changes in SharePoint and OneDrive and things like that. But in the Office 365 account, they might then launch internal phishing for more credentials, or deliver malicious files. If you don't have that kind of malicious file service that you have to pay Microsoft for, then you might be able to get files from one person to another so that they can execute that file, and then you've got a landing space on a computer. So you've landed on a computer with that when that malware gets there. So really, that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to get extra resources, extra accounts to move within the environment. The VPN endpoint's interesting, because what happens here is that the attacker is likely accessing the network from their own computer. And how VPNs work is that they create that tunnel of traffic from wherever the user is to the corporate network, but they actually assign an internal IP address. This is most of the time. They actually assign an internal IP address to that computer. So effectively, when you're on the VPN and the attackers on the VPN, they're effectively behind the firewall or on the corporate network of the organization. So all of a sudden, you have this situation where there is an unknown computer on your network, an uncontrolled and not a safe computer, but they won't have anything but the credentials that they came in with. So they then have to start looking for neighboring hosts, right? So if you get an IP address, you look at the subnet around where you are to see if there's other VPN clients maybe there, or then start looking for, scanning other networks to see if there's servers somewhere or workstations that are on the network somehow, and you start to try to build a picture. So you scan and identify neighboring hosts. Then when you find them, you determine the privileges that you have in it. And what do they have? They have those credentials for that VPN connection. So then they try those credentials at various places to see if they can actually get in. And what they're looking for is the privileges to actually run a software or to gain further access, or to find vulnerabilities then as well. So without using the credentials, they might run some sort of scan to see if there's one of those many Windows vulnerabilities. And mostly we're talking about landing on Windows endpoints. So that's what we're really, I'm not going to cover Linux, and I'm not going to cover Mac. Not that, either of those can be used in an insecure way. And there's certainly ways to make Microsoft Windows secure, but typically for corporate, we're talking about Windows environment. So in this picture where this lady is jumping from a rock to a rock, I'm making an assumption there, this person is jumping from a rock to a rock. They are literally trying to get from one resource on the network to the next. So maybe they're jumping off their VPN endpoint into a neighboring server, or into a neighboring workstation that they've identified. If you get a web shell on the perimeter, you again want to scan and identify those neighboring hosts. You won't be on a corporate network as such. You might be in a DMZ. You might be looking for servers. but you might have the credentials that you gained off that web server. If you're looking, and we'll talk about some of those techniques of looking for files and trying to get those credentials out of a normal operating system. And obviously finding vulnerabilities, not just privilege escalation, but vulnerabilities in systems around. One of the major ones is Log4Shell. If you're on a web shell and you've got on a web server and you are trying to attack systems within the DMZ, you might be looking for Log4Shell vulnerabilities so that you can run some code on those devices. And hopefully, and you've got to think about this, and we'll talk about defense in a while, but hopefully not trip up the internal defenses and detection mechanisms. The next step is to scan and identify, if you're on a standalone workstation, so you've on that workstation that's not part of the network, but that's sitting there on the network. So it's not part of the domain. It doesn't have access to anything but itself, like legitimately. Then you've got to still scan and identify neighboring hosts, determine if you've got any of the credentials that you picked up on that workstation might work elsewhere. Probably not likely, but then maybe find vulnerabilities. Look for blue keep, looking for eternal blue even hanging around, a print nightmare to try and elevate privileges onto a server, something like that. So that's some different ways of getting access. Now, the final kind of jackpot is getting onto a corporate workstation. So you have someone who is sitting at their computer, they get an email, it has a document in it, they open the document, unbeknownst to them, some JavaScript runs, like we're talking about with Imitet and TrickBot, the malware lands on the computer, all of a sudden the attacker has that landing zone. They can then look at their local privileges. Worst is if they've got local admin, that is the absolute jackpot, because then they just scrape as much of the passwords and you know, hashes, and if there's someone privileged who's logged on recently to the workstation, maybe even get some workstation admin or server admin accounts, or the absolute best is if you've actually landed on an IT support person's computer and they've got domain admin straight away, and then you're right there. But again, if you're just on a domain member and you are you know, trying to find other hosts, you scan and identify those neighboring hosts around. Obviously, you've got some credentials, so you see what privileges you have on those neighboring hosts. You find out to see if you can execute, because there are, and we'll talk about some of these weaknesses. There are ways in which that can happen. And then slowly you collect credentials. You build up, you know, I got that user's account. I managed to scrape the hashes for this user. I've got them cracking on my cracking machine, and now this is local admin here, so maybe it's local admin elsewhere. Maybe you can get an administrator's password, and this organization has set maybe all of the workstation's local administrator's password to the same thing. Are we able to crack that? Is there a hash for that? Can we get the hash for that? And can we crack that over time? And that will lead you to possibly getting access to a whole host of workstations. So we want to think about that. So once you've the scanning and identification. So the first thing to do is to determine those local privileges, like so that guy standing on the rock, he looks down at where he's landed. What has he got there? What kind of keys can he pick up? Where does the credentials work that he's got? So we get are they a normal account, or are they in the local admin group of that Windows computer? And if they are, that's great. Then we extract hashes, and if there is those recent admins, and then we decide whether it's work group or domain joined. Now, if it's domain joined, there is all sorts of different configurations. There's group policies. There's all sorts of things to work out. But the tools we use for this, if you've got local privileges, is Mimikatz, where it allows you to pull down the hashes, allows you to pull down secrets and decipher them. The first time I saw Mimikatz work in an engagement was horrifying. I saw them just download passwords or scrape passwords out of memory, and they were there in plain text. And it's really awful seeing passwords that you shouldn't be seeing in plain text and how easy it is. So with local admin, Mimikatz is diabolical. John the Ripper is an awful name, but it's a tool for cracking passwords. So you can pass all the hashes that you collect out of the SAM database into John the Ripper, put some a good word list around it, put some rules around it, and set it off cracking. And who knows, not too long and you might have some more passwords. But that's what we're talking about. The hashes are fairly well reversible unless they're really strong. And if we think about all the passwords that have been exposed in the past, and the billions of passwords that are now known about, there's often hashes for a lot of those out in the wild as well, and things like CrackStation and websites like that. Now, when you're on a VPN or workstation, you want to scan for those neighboring hosts in any case, and we're looking for services that are open on the network. So you might go for the Windows networking ports, 135, 139, 445. These are TCP ports where Windows systems will listen for connections. And if you have credentials, then typically you can open a connection and get some sort of privileges on those workstations. Obviously, it needs to be pre-configured. We're also scanning for 3389 because this is another place where you can add put credentials in and try and work out if you are have those privileges there as well. And web services are always good to look for. The amount of times I've seen some very poorly configured Tomcat or WordPress on someone's desktop because they're just mucking around, yet the service is running as system. So if you manage to get a vulnerability there and run as that service, then all of a sudden you can start creating users or pulling down hashes yourself. So that does work. There's lots of IT people have a go at doing that, but they're the sort of ports that you're looking for. And the tools that you use for that, Nmap, the Nmap scanning engine as well. Nmap will give you that ability to scan pretty quickly, but nothing's quite as quick as mass scan if you need to get across a whole host. Now, we'll talk about a bit later, but obviously the louder you are with that, the more possibility there is to actually get detected doing that. So while the network might be dark and not be monitored, it might also have a lot of visibility shed on it as well. So when you start lighting it up with scans, then it's possible that some sort of security operations center or some XDR or an NDR, and the XDR is the or EDR, endpoint detection and response, or network detection and response, will actually identify and either close you down or start to notify those who need to know. Now, once you've identified those hosts, you want to try and access them. You might use your existing credentials that you have or those that you scraped. You want to check for who is in the local admin group, and this is something to look out for. There is a prevalence to give individuals admin in their workstation just to ease the burden of support. So if someone can install their own software and change their printers and plug in Wi-Fi devices, it means they don't have to call the service desk all the time. So there has been a history, certainly in organizations that don't have a lot of resources to run IT support for every little query, then often the local person is put into the administrators group just to ease that burden. But what we can see as well is that even if you do that, the person who is the user, who is the local admin to the computer, can then actually add in other users, their friends. I've seen people sharing music off their workstation so that their friends can play the music across the network. When Winamp was a thing, showing my age. Someone will get a kick out of me mentioning Winamp, I'm sure. Anyway, so the thanks, Andre. That was from the depths, from the archives. It does whip the light. Oh, well done, Paige. That was very good. And so who's still using Winamp? That's crazy. That's fantastic. All right, it's good. So so then we're talking about adding users into the local administrator group if that person's got that kind of very simple know-how to change their groups. But in some cases, they want to share files with everyone. So to make it easy, they put the everyone user into the domain users group, or maybe the domain users into the domain user group. And then all of a sudden, this person's computer is completely accessible from the network, and anyone can execute code on there with something like PSExec. So these are the sorts of things you've got to watch out for. If you've actually supplied everyone with local admin, then over time the permissions can be changed and shared by those users, and that can lead to some very significant security gaps, because that person who's on the VPN endpoint and scanning for access comes across one of these machines, and all of a sudden they can execute code directly across the network with PSExec, and they are on that box. So it is a surefire way to get the ransomware gang further into your environment. Then we have the interactive users in admin group. This is another trick. So some organizations put the interactive users into the domain admins group, which means once somebody's logged in, they can actually get access. And if they only if they logged in interactively, so either through the keyboard and mouse or through RDP, then they are in that admin group. The problem with that is that if you allow RDP around the place and someone has credentials, then they can log in that way, and then they get admin group. And it's very similar to putting the everyone group in admin group as well. So that means that all of a sudden that machine is wide open, and they can actually wait for a desktop admin or a server admin to log into one of these machines, and all of a sudden with Mimikatz they have that password. So that is a diabolical way for an organization to have ransomware fly through their environment. The other thing that some people do is actually just share their C drive or admin drive, C dollar, admin dollar. These are built-in shares in Windows. If they've overly shared them, there's things you can do in there that will also execute code, thinking about, obviously putting in scheduled tasks or changing registry keys, all sorts of things. So these are the sorts of things that will make it easy. And then we have the tools that will use that for this to actually find your where your credentials work on the network. An attacker might use the SMB auxiliary scanner out of Metasploit, which is basically you put in a username and a password and a subnet, and it will go try every IP in that subnet and come back with where it has worked. Then we have also a domain, so username, domain is part of the username. Then we have the PSExec auxiliary scanner. So you can do the same thing, put a username and password in the PSExec auxiliary scanner, put it in an IP range, and it will tell you which computers it can execute code on. And it's reaching across the network. So if you are getting these systems, this beachhead, these systems compromised on your network, this is what is going to occur. They're going to try and expand their access. And this is before any vulnerabilities, right? This is misconfiguration, permissions issues. And then obviously if you're doing PSExec, you might want to put Meterpreter on, and we'll talk a little bit more about that with the practical element of this course for the exam. So there is some technical fun that we have. We gather 5 flags. I'll talk about it at the end of this live session. And then we'll load the, so if you do get PSExec, and this is a little bit of knowledge for those who see this in their environment, and their antivirus says, hey, something's happened, there's a tool on here I didn't expect, it will load, PSExec will load the PSExec service on the target host and execute that. So that's a file that suddenly appears that you don't want to appear if your admins aren't using that tool. And I reckon in most cases, if your admins are using that tool, then they should probably be using something else. And also, I'll say that with all these things and with the right know-how, a lot of this is automated through PowerShell as well. And some of the ransomware works like that. It's all written in PowerShell and does a lot of this heavy lifting for you. But often that will create a lot of noise as well. So sometimes going bit by bit is better to stay under the radar. WMIC, yes, as well. That's right. Windows Management Instrumentation console. What is WMIC? Yeah, okay. Good. Then we have misconfigured overlapping permissions. Whoops. Some of these things we've covered already. The PowerShell is what I wanted to talk about, and also going into Computer Manager and actually looking at where those overlapping permissions are is important as well, and understanding how that is occurring. One of the things that I'll pull up, and you'll pull up in the little exercise we have, is the Windows Manager, the Computer Management MSC, the Microsoft Console. I think it is the MSC, Microsoft Console, that they brought in around Windows 2000, I think. Yeah, I think it was Windows 2000, and then that will give you an idea of the events that are going on, the users, the groups, and a whole idea. So if you have admin over, or even if you have limited rights, it still gives you a fair bit of information, allow you to see the users and groups, but not necessarily change them. Now, this is one of the things I've seen a fair bit, is that credentials leak into plain text files or backups. Okay, so if you are an IT admin person, often you want to automate tasks. So you'll create scripts to get things done. And sometimes it's a bit of a pain to create a script with only the permissions you need to get that task done, because it kind of boxes you in, creates a bit of extra work. And heck, why don't I just use my domain admin's credential so that it can all get done much easier, and I have no permission issues. And then maybe I'll take it out later and replace it with a service account that doesn't have that kind of permissions, but then they forget to do that. So the scripts can be a terrific way to get passwords for automated tasks, especially, yeah, that's right. So Marco, absolutely the case with UberHack. I think there's scripts on their Thycotic server, is that right? And then they were able to get admin rights over the Thycotic server. A Thycotic server is a bit of software that manages privileged credentials. And then they were able to scrape all of these privileged credentials, like having a gold mine in front of you for the attackers. I think they didn't go much further than that. They got caught, but wow, what a great what a great splash in the pan, a flash in the pan. Often in Excel files. So I've seen this a lot, where you might have different passwords for different systems around the place, like Unix boxes, a Linux box, some other Windows environment or an application that you need to administer. You need to keep those somewhere. You don't really have a good password manager, so you put it into the Excel file, and with the idea of where you use that, and sometimes you can scrape them straight out of that. C password is terrible. So there used to be I think so. There used to be a fairly well used technique for automatic computer builds, and anyone who's not checked their domain environment for passwords in the C password file should go and have a look. It's a XML file that hangs on the Active Directory in a domain controller, so that when you do an automated build, it will automatically create users, and often the local admin user, on that build. So you can automate all of that stuff. Now that worked really well until Microsoft published I don't think it was accidental, but I don't think it was a long-term view, but it was actually published in a KB article, the symmetric password for that C password XML, right? So you could decrypt it. So those passwords essentially just sitting out there for everyone to be able to see, because once you get that encrypted password, you can decrypt it, and it can be some privileged access as well. So this is another place where passwords and credentials end up. Now, Hive Nightmare is a little bit of a trick. Hive Nightmare is a vulnerability identified in Windows boxes not that long ago, where backup of a shadow copy of the SAM file is made on the computer, and the attackers can access that SAM file, get the hashes out of it because it's not protected by the file system, not protected by the operating system because it's sitting on the file system, and then they can start cracking hashes or using those hashes for authentication with pass the hash and things like that. We'll cover that later. So that's a really a really easy way for them to find things. So if you're not a local admin on a computer, then you can go for that sort of a backup of the SAM file in the shadow copy. But then also disk images I've seen as well, where there are some backups of servers or backups of workstations made and deposited on open shares, open Windows shares in a network, so that they just do a regular backup. I'm going to back up to a server, and you go to that server and you can see everyone's workstation is backed up. But if you can actually grab that backup file, you can mount that backup file, that disk image, and then you can pick the SAM file off that backup file as well and start cracking hashes as well. So we have to kind of think about the image of a Windows computer is really not secure if you're accessing it offline. Okay, so I mean, from an offline perspective, if it's off and you're just accessing the disk through the file system rather than accessing the disk through the operating system, then it's not a safe and secure place. So that's another way to get plain text files or backups off the network. The kind of things to look for: search tools, find string, explorer. There's also I think a tool from PS Tools, from the Win Internals tool. There's a share finder as well to catalog all the shares, so you can look in those for files as well. In one scenario, I did actually find domain controller backups. This is the worst possible because you get the whole domain SAM, and then you've got everyone's hash, and then you can just go for it. So it can get really bad if these things aren't followed and understood. Okay, now we're also looking for unpatched workstations and servers. So everything we've talked about before is basically because of misconfiguration of systems and misconfiguration of permissions. So that is, you know, very easy to do in a large environment. If you think about a large environment full of Windows boxes, big Active Directory, making sure that entire environment keeps its nose clean is quite an effort. And then on top of that is the vulnerabilities that get discovered over time. So we kind of think of software as having, you know, we discover vulnerabilities, so they accumulate vulnerabilities over time, but it's not the case. The vulnerabilities are there at the start when the computer is installed and when the software is released. The vulnerabilities are there, and it's not a matter of it degrading over time. It's just a matter of discovery of those vulnerabilities over time. So these are examples, and we talked a bit about these in the past. These are examples of vulnerabilities that have occurred over time in Windows. I bring these around because I bring these up because these are the typical ones that will give access to systems on a corporate environment. So LSAS, a very goodie and an odd. It was the LSAS vulnerability was actually really, because it was in the LSAS service, was actually really reliable. It was a good one. I remember using it in one situation where we saw an infection of a computer. We didn't have, it was trying to infect other computers. We didn't have access to that computer. It ended up being a POS terminal in a cafe. The only way we figured that out is by actually breaking into this vulnerability here and running our own VNC inject, so we could actually see the screen and we could find out who owned the box, and we actually go tell them to clean it up. Configure is an oldie but a goodie as well, very reliable. We talked about Eternal Blue with WannaCry and Petya Not Petya, and then Bluekeep is an enormous one. So you know, when you're on an environment and people, or there hasn't been patching of workstations, this is the one to look for. If you're not doing vulnerability scanning of your internal network, these are the ones to look for, because they're the ones that are going to allow that lateral movement. And you can do that with Nmap network scripting engine and actually target these instead of doing a full Tenable, Nessus, the other Nexpos, all sorts of other scanners. You can use these as network scanners with Nmap. They're all free, so all open source, which is terrific. Then there's local credential harvesting and escalation with Print Nightmare and Hive Nightmare, fairly recent ones. So that patching's got to continue. If you lapse in your patching, then you might be vulnerable to some of these. And the tools that we use to find some of these, the Metasploit, I talked about Nmap and your vulnerability scanner, all that sort of thing to find these vulnerabilities on the network. And I think it's time for some questions, Jack.
I think it is. I think it's a great time for a couple of questions. So we've got a few. Let's start from the start. Atul has asked if APIs carry ransomware, which is quite a broad question, but
Yeah.
we'll start broad and we'll get a little bit more concise.
I guess if an API can take files, so I do know of some APIs that deliver maybe resumes or cover letters to recruitment agencies, and if they ingest documents into another system to be opened by users, then I guess they can deliver ransomware. I think that maybe there's, the API is just a conduit of information in a common kind of simple language, so you can pretty much transfer anything you like in there. I don't think it's as common because you kind of need, in a lot of cases, someone to execute the malware. But yeah, I guess any time that there's an API that is kind of configured or set to be able to allow that sort of thing, there's a risk of that. But often APIs have very kind of set criteria and set messages, so they don't typically have that kind of file. I'm saying that just from my own experience, but usually it's about transferring little bits of information backwards and forwards rather than doing the whole transferring files like an FTP would or something like that. I hope that answered the question.
Great, yeah, thank you. Aaron has asked, has there been any progress with AI for detecting usage anomalies for end user accounts in addition to privilege lockdown to restrict the access?
Yeah, so I think there's say the last bit of that question again, Jack.
So has there been any progress using AI to detect usage anomalies for end user accounts, as well as using privilege lockdown to restrict access?
Privilege lockdown. Yeah, so first question around AI. So is it user behavioral monitoring, user behavior and access monitoring, I think UBA is the term. So there's a whole industry around that. I think there's some good products, and I'm not endorsed by any sort of products, but I know Exabeam's one of those ones that will look at user behavior and identify and do a bit of machine learning and artificial intelligence to tell you what's normal and what's not normal. And that's always very good for organizations that do have a normal. I have been part of organizations where there's not very much normal. It's always changing. There's always edge cases, and then you get a lot of false positives. So I think with a lot of AI and machine learning, the real benefit comes when you use the AI and machine learning to be able to do some of the heavy lifting with data analysis to find those anomalies, and then you can use that for investigation. So I think that there's been a bit of progress there. Don't think it's quite the panacea that we hope for. On the lockdown privileges, I think you mean you might mean kind of doing the principle of least privilege. So making sure that users on a workstation in an environment only have the access they need to have. If you look at the Essential 8, that is all about only providing the access that is required, not only from a permissions perspective, but also from an execution perspective, and also the patching side, of course. But there's a lot of that kind of mentality in the Essential 8. It can be difficult to implement, especially if you're in a culture that expects freedom. But yeah, again, it's this balance between what you allow users to do and how much impact it has on their work and load it has on IT support and actually helping them to get things done. The kind of the unicorn environment is where they can do everything they need with only the permissions they need. And that's very hard to find that. And some organizations strive for a long time to get that balance. I hope I answered that question.
Yeah, fantastic. I really always find that people that know, people that know less about AI tend to find it a panacea, and then people probably, much like many of the participants in our chat as well, who know more about it, are slightly more skeptical a lot of the time. Min's asked, if someone keeps getting automatic phishing scam emails, the scam emails then automatically keep generating more scam emails. How do we stop those scam emails? So how do you stop an endless cascade of scam emails? Is there a way to do so? Inquiring minds want to know.
Yeah. So there's a lot of factors that can impact that. In a corporate environment, you typically have an email gateway that you can put rules in, all the way down to regexes or even around just content scanners, so that if you get a certain phrase or a certain a certain sequence of words in an email, I imagine a cascading scamming email, you could probably stop with something like that, because it would have a lot of similarities. If there's cascading, they wouldn't be all kind of coming from different locations or coming from with different content. But if you're talking about kind of friendly phishing or phishing simulation that's turned into a cascade of emails, then there's probably something wrong with that system, and it needs to just target, be able to send emails to those who need to receive it. Yeah, I think that's probably all I can offer there.
Thank you. I specifically requested that Kit leave this in the chat because I really wanted to just get to read out some of these words all together. Yeah. Anonymous attendee has asked, where can I see dark web exposed credentials? Is there any reputable dark web URL to access? And I just really wanted to say reputable dark web URL. Thank you for the opportunity. Whoever submitted this credential, this question, sorry.
Yeah, so like anything, the dark web is in criminal organizations probably a little bit unreliable and a little bit dangerous to hang around. And often, they need some, you need some sort of, credential to get in there. So you've got to register, maybe even pay a little bit of money, or even I've seen some dark web forums requiring proof of hack as well. So, they say, show us a website that you've hacked and put these words in it, and then we'll let you get in. So they do some curation. But then again, all of these sites I'm talking about have since fallen over and new ones have stood up as well. So it's a kind of a shifting and changing environment. There are organizations that specialize in monitoring dark web and deep web forums and websites for compromised credentials. It's not as easy as just going and having a look, because it really is a culture and a environment of its own. So they don't want to be, they can only get so popular before law enforcement comes down on them. So it's always a bit shady, always a bit shifty, and you can't really trust those running those forums either, because they're always trying to scam people as well. So it's a bit of a funny place to enter into. You can have some good experience there, but you can also have very frustrating experience actually not finding anything as well. So not as easy as just browsing to a website. And sometimes they're all behind a Tor browser as well, the Onion Ring browser. So sometimes they're all just Tor websites that are hosted on kind of, that network environment that overlays the internet. So they're a bit hard to get to as well. If that helped.
Right. Be careful, everybody. I suppose. Chris has asked, how does a DMZ keep these different scanning software packages out? And is it worth creating a DMZ at home with 2 modems or routers?
Oh, yeah. So this is a setup I have. DMZ, so that you've got segmentation in your environment. So the DMZ basically just contains a network within a border, and then it sounds like the person who asked it knows a little bit about DMZs, because they've actually suggested 2 routers, and that's exactly the way you can do that, by just having that segmentation. DMZ, funny military term, demilitarized zone. It's really for web servers in a corporate where you have internet accessible systems, but then you might have layers. So you'll have a DMZ chopped up into 3 layers, where you'll have the web servers, the application servers, and then database servers. That's like a traditional kind of way of doing it. Now, the way that might protect it is that between those layers, you have firewall rules that only allow certain traffic. So you have to use kind of the application logic to punch from one layer to the next. But if you are on the front web layer or in the application layer, and you try and scan around to look for the other layers, then you'll only see those ports open. You won't see the whole server. Like you won't see SSH, you won't see other services running there. So it can mean that if you have a vulnerability in that environment, it's not reachable because of those firewalls. So that's how DMZ works, but it goes much broader than that, and it's something to do with some of the protection measures. Is about network segmentation. So you want to start moving your VPN people off somewhere to an isolated network. You want to move your wireless to an isolated network, maybe your workstations to an isolated network, not to cut them off from the rest of the network, but to inspect the traffic as it goes through. Because if you imagine you get onto a VPN endpoint and you start scanning the corporate network, if you've got IPS inspecting that traffic, a good IPS will say, hey, there's someone scanning SMB. I'm going to start dropping that traffic. I'm going to send alerts up. So you start getting visibility into the traffic traversing your network. That was a very big answer. But I like that question.
Very interesting question. Thank you, Chris. Andrew has said, what is the current best practice for expiring passwords?
You saw my thing. So I usually do a poll on this, and it comes about half-half. Half people like expiring passwords and half people don't. I don't think the Australian I don't think the ACSC has gone there yet, but certainly NIST has, and certainly the UK bodies, authorities on cybersecurity have, where they no longer recommend expiring passwords, so that, the 90-day, you got to refresh your password, because we all know in the end, human nature, we just rotate a number either at the end or the beginning, but most likely at the end. And what's supposed to happen is that you choose a brand new password each time. But really, it only protects you if that password is exposed through a keylogger, through phishing, through, the major threat scenarios are generally around immediate obtaining of that password. And if someone's obtained that password, then it's valid until it gets changed again. So it only protects you for a window. The real thing it protects you against is that password being used in another system that has been breached, and there's a password or a credential dump from that system. And then if you're using that password for a couple of years and that password's valid, then eventually some attacker is going to pick it up and try and use it on your system. So that's the only thing it really protects you against. So the actual value of expiring passwords has been seen to decrease, if it ever really did help at all. But it ends up just choosing, you end up just choosing the same password with a different variant. The other point about that is we should really be moving away from trying to fix our password problem, moving away from passwords, putting in that extra multi-factor authentication, or even going passwordless in some instances is appropriate as well. So I have moved away from expiring passwords as a recommendation, just because it causes more problems in availability than it does in fixing security issues. A bit like expiring TLS certificates, but I won't go into that. That's probably a whole other live session.
Right, and last question for this Q&A. Abdullah has asked, what is the difference between IPS system and AI solution regarding user behavior?
Oh, So usually an AI solution regarding user behavior will just take log feeds from popular applications to map user behavior and work out what an anomaly is. You know, this person comes in, they do invoices all day. For some reason today, they've gone to the customer database and downloaded all of that. That's the kind of thing a UABA does. But the thing that IPS will do is typically on the network. There is host-based IPS, which will look for stuff that's very much like antivirus, but with extra smarts, or an IPS on a host might actually look at the network stack as well. But typically when we're talking about IPS, we're talking about a network device, sometimes a firewall, sometimes it sits out on its own, that will be in line. So traffic will be flowing through it, and it will inspect the traffic as it's going around the network. And if it finds that someone is trying to exploit a vulnerability, and with kind of good confidence, it will pick that up, alert someone, and block it. So that's the difference. It's more around kind of identifying malicious network traffic than identifying malicious user behavior out of logs. Yeah.
Right, thank you. So that is our Q&A session for now. We'll do another little Q&A right at the end of the presentation, which won't be too far off. Feel free to pop some more questions in there, and when the presentation finishes, we'll close the Q&A. Thanks.
Great. All right. So the protection measures we're talking about, I want to keep Workstation servers patched. That's an obvious one, but difficult to do as well. You get yourself a vulnerability scanner, you run it across, you find the stuff that is bad, and you patch it. You limit local admin. We have LAPs that can help there. The local admin privilege, I don't know the SE of that, but it's actually a product from Microsoft. It comes with Windows in the domain. You can run it in Active Directory and actually manage the local admin passwords on your workstations, so you don't have the same password everywhere. You can set a really strong password to protect yourself, but if just one person figures out what that is, then you know, it's not really great, because it gets network access across the network to the local admin of that box. You want strong passwords. So no use having, and everyone's guilty of it, no use having welcome 123 and never requiring users to change password, or today 123, or Monday 123, or password 1. All of these great passwords that we have to move away from them. We have to choose strong passwords. We talked about expiring passwords. A good way to choose strong passwords is to use a password manager. Password 1 and LastPass or 1Password are great password managers, but obviously you want to protect those as well. So you want multi-factor authentication on all of that, all those password managers. Thycotic for corporate, if obviously you're not Uber and you've got it set up properly, it can be a good password manager as well for technicians. And then IPS between network zones, we talked about that. A lot of that reconnaissance, a lot of that scanning is threshold based, right? So if you have landed, you're a ransomware operator, you've landed in an environment and you believe you've only got maybe a couple of days to find other systems, then you're going to be scanning the heck out of that environment. You're just going to be scanning and scanning, and it will trip IPS thresholds. A clever ransomware operator will keep their scanning down and just do bits and pieces there, all the while knowing that their access could be cut if they're discovered as well. So the IPS will help you with those thresholds. It'll help with the vulnerabilities, exploits, but if it's not beyond the normal traffic and they're not trying to exploit, then it's very hard to find as well. So all of these protection measures have their limitations. We want education to our users, no graphical representation of passwords. So if they're seeing their password on a daily base in a file, then that's not okay. They've got to stop doing that. We do not keep passwords unprotected. particularly for IT staff and those who are, sysadmin or network admin. Don't store backups where you can see them as well. So backups should be considered the keys to the kingdom, keys to something anyway, and they should be protected and not accessible. Do your own lateral movement testing. We talk a lot of, next week we'll go right into Active Directory, the absolute disaster that it can be. Lateral movement testing in an environment. You find those workstations, if you're the security person in an organization, have a scan for workstations where you might have privileges and see if you have domain, if you have local admin of them. Can you access the C dollar? Can you access admin dollar? If you can, it's likely you are. So do your own lateral movement testing to figure out those really easy steps to stop that ransomware occurring. Make it difficult when someone lands on your environment. Make it difficult for them to move around. Don't hand the whole thing out to them on a platter. Antivirus is obviously important. It has its limitations. It's kind of morphed into endpoint detection and response. A lot of the antivirus companies have gone that way anyway. But essentially, the old idea of just looking for a file and hashing it to see if it's in the antivirus thing has gone away. It's now looking to see if it's in the antivirus database, the local antivirus databases. It's gone away. Now it's more about sensors. So you're looking at behavior on that network. You're looking at files that have been run on that network, and often the EDR is sending all that to the cloud. And if there is something that aligns with their machine learning, their AI, then they get someone to investigate. They set up an alert, an indication, some sort of detection has occurred. You've got to go have a look at that. And then there's network detection and response, which is kind of like beefed up IPS as well. It's again a tool that is being run by a vendor. A lot of the detection and telemetry goes to a cloud application provided by the vendor, and they do all this analysis on that traffic and the patterns in it. So yeah, really, these are good protection measures. We will talk more about protection measures like for Active Directory a bit more next week. Now, there is a part of the exam. I wanted, for this course, I wanted to give everyone an opportunity to see what it's like to land on a workstation, to gather information about that workstation to use in attacking that workstation from a Linux box. Okay, so it's a little bit of a simulation around landing on that rock and looking down and seeing what you have at hand to move laterally. This CTF workstation, we call it Capture the Flag. For those familiar with those kinds of competitions, there's 5 flags that you collect from this workstation that are in the exam. Okay, and I'll release the details for this next week. But basically, you're getting a Kali Linux box in VirtualBox, I recommend, a Windows 8.1 with an i11 image from Microsoft, which is already a pre-built VirtualBox machine. And they've done this to allow people to do kind of web page testing with legacy browsers, which is very handy. You want that VirtualBox to be networked or bridged so that the systems need to see each other. You do password discovery, file discovery, you use Metasploit a bit, you dump some secrets with Meterpreter, and then you also muck around with Windows Defender and Windows Firewall to make all that possible. So I recommend you start looking into some of these items. I will provide specific instructions next week, and there will be, and the thing that I really want everyone to get from this, and I know we're out of time, and I'll talk a bit more about it next week, but what I want them to get from it is there are multiple ways of owning these boxes. There's multiple ways of getting the information you need out of a box. So we also need multiple protection measures. Okay, and I think that's it. So again, a little bit over time. I'll try and keep it to the 8:30 mark next week, but I hope that's been enjoyable and enlightening.
Thanks very much, Jeremy, and very much appreciate the swift timing. We do have 2 questions in the Q&A that I might ask just before we finish up, because we do say, 8:30, but it's kind of 8:45 type of thing. So Tantally has said, what about using Sandbox for measure protection?
For measure protection?
Mm-hmm.
So sandboxing is great. I'm not sure what's meant by measure protection, but sandboxing is good. I think there's a lot of sandboxing built into to browsers. You can kind of do sandboxing in a workstation if you get everyone to run in a virtual box or in a virtual desk, a VDI, a virtual desktop on a server or something like that. So there are some technologies that do that fine. It's just that sandboxes are limiting, I guess. You're not directly interfacing with the hardware. You get some sort of, it's not the easiest thing to maintain as well if it's not kind of built in. Most people need kind of Office applications on their workstation, although work of the future might just be all in, in the browser, and it's kind of heading that way. But there is a vast range of applications that are used by an organization, typically, certainly an enterprise. So it's difficult to make sure all of that works in a sandbox. So it can create quite an administrative overhead to get that working.
Right. Thank you. Sorry, I just
That's all right.
forgot where my mute or my unmute button was for a moment. Lucky has asked, why not Windows 10, I believe, in regards to the exam content?
Oh, good question. When I was putting this together, I was kind of hoping that image had a vulnerability in it. But then the license of this of this image actually requires you not to actually exploit vulnerability. So I ended up not using it for that, but it's a nice image because it's not super well put together, and it can be indicative of some enterprise organizations that haven't kept their systems up to date as well. So it was just the way it worked. That's a good question.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Chris, who's asked the question about saving the chat, you're going to need to have a chat to Kit about that, although I'm not sure if we're able to do that. My apologies. If you're interested in the leads and things that were discussed in the chat and you'd like to continue having a conversation with your fellow participants as well as Jeremy, I would like to direct you to the forums, which you can find at learn.itmasters.edu.au, which is where you will also find the recordings of each session, as well as all of the additional materials that are provided by Jeremy for your learning enjoyment. If you are having a lot of learning enjoyment, interesting segue that I've made there, I'm going to run with it. If you're enjoying the session so far and you'd like to delve a little bit deeper, you can check out our selection of other free short courses, some of which are related to this topic, others of which are completely different, and the university subjects for the courses that they feed into. So this subject, I believe, is primarily, this short course, I believe, is primarily drawn from a subject called ITC 595, sorry, Information Security. Is that correct, Jeremy?
No, this is all fresh content, actually.
This is fresh content. Okay, well, this is a teaser for potential future subjects.
No, that's right. Yeah,
I suppose. We have, I believe, similar content or related content in subjects like information security, hacking countermeasures, cybersecurity fundamentals, dark web, and others that are available in our full-length graduate certificates and master's courses. If you are interested in taking one of those courses, you can fill in the eligibility assessment form, which Kit has just put the link to in the chat. Feel free to check that out if you are interested in further study. We do love to have people come from the short courses into the full-length courses. And as an additional sweetener, if you complete and pass 3 of the short courses, that counts as 1 subject credit towards a full-length graduate certificate or master's degree subject. So that's 1/4 of a graduate certificate. It's very good, if I do say so myself. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming along tonight, this morning, 5 a.m. for some of you, I'm sure. Thank you very much, Jeremy, for presenting such a fantastic and engaging presentation once again. Thank you, Kit, for doing all of the back end and logistical maneuvering in the background. And thank you to everyone for coming along. See you next week.
Next week.
Have a lovely week. Don't get hacked.